Hi friends, this is Marilyn from tarotclarity.com again, and today's video is a little on the heavy side, maybe. um, I'm betting that some of you who might be interested in learning tarot or learning about tarot might have a schism between your desire to, learn about this wonderful pastime and how you were brought up, or the people in your life, who say or put down in your mind that reading the cards is wicked or evil, or that cartomancy in general is the work of the devil. Now, some people are very dismissive when that comes up in conversation, and they won't address it. But I think it's important to address. I know my own experience, if you don't mind me sharing it, it shows that you can overcome that fear or that obstacle. When I was a girl, 16 years old or 10 years old, I saw tarot cards for the first time on national television in America. This image is reversed because I'm doing a selfie. But this was the first tarot deck, I believe, that ever appeared on American television. And it appeared in the Gothic soap opera Dark Shadows. Now, I'm not going to get into that story. I wrote a blog article on it, and I'll link it below if you're interested in reading. But when I was 10 and I saw that episode, there was something very seductive about the cards. They enchanted me. And so I think that is, the thing, that people who think of tarot as the work of the devil, is that it is enchanting. And once you get in it, it becomes very seductive. Now, from my perspective, the seduction isn't that I'm a slave to trying to foretell the future, or that I'm a slave of trying to circumvent what the universe has or God has in store for us. The seduction for me is in the beauty of the cards. I went on to attend professional art school and become an artist and an art teacher. So for me, the seduction was in the beauty and what the cards communicated and how they communicated their messages. And but at any rate, at 10 years old, I didn't know all of that. I just knew that I thought those were gorgeous cards. Where could I get my hands on them? There was none to be found. And I was a little girl, so it wasn't like I could go to the store. I didn't even know what they were called. I just knew they were playing cards that were put on the table to tell secrets, And it wasn't until I was about 16, 6 years later, that I was in a novelty shop in suburban Philadelphia. I saw the exact same deck that appeared in the Dark Shadows episode. And I thought, oh, I have to buy them. I have to have them, because I remembered. And I had always wanted them, and I had always hoped to see them sometime. When I found them, I grabbed them. And from that point forward, I was hooked. I was hooked on the beauty. I was hooked in learning more about where they came from, what they were all about. And I kept them secret because in my household, I was raised by a very strict parents. My father was old school from Spain. So he was a very strict Spaniard. And my mother was, a very, religious Italian woman. So on both sides, there was this very, very strict adherence to Catholicism. And I was very fearful of letting my parents know that I had bought these cards. So I kept it secret for a number of years. Now I'll fast forward a number of years until, I've been doing it probably 20 years when my father found out I read them. And he told me, oh, my grandmother did that. So for all those years, I hid them from my parents for no reason. I hid it because I was afraid, that of their response, being religious people. But it was part of my father's upbringing. It was in his family, And so sometimes the short answer to when people say cards are wicked, or you're fearful of letting your family know that you do this, the short answer is they might not. So, and rather than poo-poo them or keep it secret, you might want to address it with them and see, it may be something that they've always were fascinated by, or maybe they aren't as, closed-minded as some people who are fervently religious tend to be. Now, the deeper question that I'd like to explore and get into is, the cards themselves, and using the cards for cartomancy or for divination or for foretelling the future. I think there has been a pull away from telling the future for a number of years. I believe in the way I use it, and I think a lot of other people who use tarot use it for, the ability it has to help someone get beyond something, right? To help them heal, to help them move on from sometimes challenging circumstances that have occurred to them. But even that might not be enough. And so what I would like to do is flip the phone so that you can see some of the earliest cards that were ever created, the earliest tarot cards that were ever created, to understand them on a cellular level, so that you can see where they come from and how they are, if anything, full of devout religious imagery. And from the beginning, they were intended to remind people of living a good moral life. So with that in mind, I'm going to flip the camera, and I'll see you on the other side. Okay, so let's cut to the chase. What are tarot cards? The deck I'm using to help illustrate today's video lesson, if you'd like to call it that, I'm using the Visconti Modrone Tarot deck, which is among one of the earliest, Visconti decks that exists, probably somewhere from the mid-1400s. And this particular deck has been put out by Scarabeo. Just give them a nod. Now, I'm using this deck because, as I said, it's one of the earliest decks that we have available to us. Not all of the cards exist today, and for the purpose of creating or recreating this particular deck, they did recreate a number of cards that were either missing or were not part of the original deck. Now, I keep using the words card and deck. So yes, the game of tarot was a game of cards. Where did cards come from? Well, cards, probably came to Europe via the Middle East. The Mamluk cards, which were brought probably to Spain, and then from Spain to Italy and France, and then the rest of Europe. So they were already in existence, a deck of playing cards with 4 suits and ranks. And then somewhere in Italy, one got the idea, probably the noble family, and in this case, the Visconti family, got the idea to create a deck of playing cards for their own purposes, which included 4 suits, as did the other cards, whereby they would maybe put their family symbols in the coins to remind us that they were of a noble family. These would have been cards that were commissioned, very expensive, by the best artists of the day. But at any rate, they also had 4 suits. They had cups. They had what we now call staves. In this particular deck, they're represented by arrows. They had swords and coins. And as I mentioned, they took the opportunity to put their family emblem on the coins to remind themselves of how important and rich they were. Now, the 4 suits came from the Middle East. There was a suit that was coins. There was one that were scimitars, which were the curved swords. There were polo sticks, which I don't believe that the Europeans could identify with or understand. So that was one particular suit that they recreated to suit what they understood. And that was, in this case, arrows, and later on became batons or staves. And then the suit of cups. Now, it could be said that these four suits also represented four classes of society, like clergy, religious people, spiritual people, creative, poetic people. Maybe if these represented hunting, people of the land, peasants, people who worked the land. Swords certainly would have been nobility, people who were knighted. Maybe they themselves were not, nobles, but aristocrats, And then the merchants, the people who had the money, the bankers. Now, to this original deck of playing cards of four suits, which had numbers which ranked from ace, and this is an example of the ace of coins, to 10, and then the court cards. Now, as they came to us from the Middle East, there would not have been images of humans because that was forbidden, but it wasn't an obstacle. It wasn't an obstacle for the Europeans, who then included additional court cards. And the Italians included 4 court cards. They included pages or valets, knights, queens, and kings. And in addition to the standard deck of playing cards, the Italians added 22 additional cards. 21 of those cards are called trump cards or triumphant cards, triomphi, cards of triomphi. Triomphi means triumph, right? And an additional card, which I guess we could understand as a kind of wild card. He was outside of the deck of cards. He was his own agent. So the understanding was, with these additional 21 or 22 cards, was that they would triumph or trump other cards, and they would trump one another. So they would have value above and beyond all the other cards, and depending on their rank in the deck themselves, they would rank one over the other. Now, what does this lesson have to do with our cards, or using the cards evil or wicked? I'm getting there, but it takes a little bit of an explanation to really understand it thoroughly, so please do bear with me. Bear in mind that 1400s Italy was a very religious period of time. Not everyone could read or write. Certainly the people who created this deck could, but not everyone else could. And playing cards, especially decks of like this, where we have 22 trump cards, were a good opportunity to communicate ideas and ideals and goals, which were very important to society. Let's look at these individual cards and see what kind of things they do communicate. Now, this card is now commonly referred to as the Fool, but his real name was the Madman. He was the insane one. He was someone who was not in his right mind. And he was not considered to be part of the original trumps. He was a character who flowed through the cards themselves. He had no value, but he was the wild card. He was unpredictable. He could come in and take all your cards that were very valuable because he had that power. So, although he's represented by someone who has nothing, bear in mind that someone who has nothing to lose. And so it made sense that this would become their kind of wild card. He's a person who's outside of polite society. You know, he's shabbily dressed. He has feathers in his hair, which at that time communicated, if you look at other paintings of the time, communicated like light in the head, you know. In this image, he does not carry, you know, like a satchel of goods. He's just a vagabond, you know. So this would be someone who is not even fit for society. He's outside of society. The first card, and I do not believe that this is an original, so it was recreated to appear as though it could be an original, was like a street peddler, you know. He was someone who conned you, like the guy on the corner that you may have seen, who uses a ball under cups. And it's a magic trick, a sleight of hand. He wants your money. And so you're never going to win unless you're onto his tricks, right? And his goal is just to trick you. So he's not far above this character, right? He's the lowest common denominator. He's the street hustler. He's not someone that we aspire to be. He's the lowest ranking trump card. In later years, you know, when the occultists came around, they raised him to the status of magician, meaning someone who had power and authority and could create things or make something from nothing or manifest magic to make something happen. But he's still ranked number one. And number one is the lowest ranking card. And so I do believe that the ranking of magician, or the elevation to the title of magician, is really a false one. He really is a street hustler. His value has not changed. He has not gone from 1 to 21. He's still the lowest ranking form of, you know, human civilized society, the hustler. The next card we have is the female pope. Now, the female pope, of course, never existed. And if it did, it's been, you know, all traces of the female pope have been obliterated by the Catholic Church. So there would be no evidence of her still existing. But there is a stronghold that believes that there was a Saint Joan. And Saint Joan was a woman who was so well read that she decided there were greater opportunities afforded to her as a man. And so she pretended to be a man and was accepted as a man and rose to the rank, you know, to pope, until a pregnancy complicated her life. She was found out, and then she was killed for heresy or whatever they charged her with. And she's number 2. Now, 2 is not a very high ranking number. It's very low. But she is a woman who has knowledge, and she is a woman who is smarter than the average bear, right? She's smarter even than the average man of the time. But she never would have been elevated above and beyond her status as a woman. And so she remains number 2. Now, it's possible that in the Visconti family, this might have been a reference to a sister Manfreda of their own family from 200 years earlier, but she too was a heretic and was burned at the stake. And I don't know if they would have put her in a deck of cards. Certainly it was their own private deck, so they could portray individuals as they liked and saw fit. And if they wanted to put someone from their own family in the deck of cards, who was going to stop them? Except that if they played cards with people of noble birth or whatever, this would be a complicating thing to show if they were representing their own heretical ancestor. But it's interesting that in the 1400s, a female pope was represented in the cards. So if there was not a female pope, they at least believed that there was. They at least believed in the lore or the myth of Pope Joan. The next, number 3, is the Empress. Now, whereas the female pope has knowledge and power and understanding of the spiritual realm, this is a worldly woman. This is a woman of the world. She's wealthy, she's affluent, she's achieved things, probably in her association with her husband, who just happens to be the 4th card, the Emperor. He is a man of the world. So we have the first 4 people, the lowest of the low, a female woman of spiritual service, a female woman of the noble world, her husband, and then the Pope. These 5 people in their tier of importance represent, I think, the gentry of the medieval world. Certainly the Pope would have been seen as the authority of their spiritual world. Now the next card is love. It's an abstract thing. All the cards we've seen so far were people and their stations and what they represent. But this is a concept. Love. Chariot. Success. Fame. Moving forward. If this deck of cards had been created for purposes of a wedding, to commemorate a wedding, it makes sense that the female would have been represented as, the bride would have been represented as, the image in the chariot, what she brings to the family, or what she brings to the family she's marrying into. Justice. You need to live an upright life. Wisdom. Right? We have the Hermit. In those days, he would not have, I don't believe was called the Hermit. He might have been, but there's no names, if you'll notice, on the cards. But you'll also notice that he carries the hourglass. Now, I don't believe that this particular card is original to the deck, but it was recreated in a way that matches many other decks of the time. And they also carried hourglasses. So he most likely represented the concept of time, moving forward, wisdom, wisdom. It's also possible that he represented one of the cardinal virtues of wisdom. It's unknown which card represents prudence, but he stands to be a contender. So there's like moral lesson here, right? Justice is one of the also one of the cardinal virtues, right? So justice is a virtue, right? Being fair is a virtue. Being wise is a virtue. If wisdom or prudence wasn't represented by this card, it may have been represented by the female pope. Then we have the reminder of time. Sometimes we reign. Sometimes we have done it, but we no longer do. Sometimes we are almost there, like we aspire to reign, we reign. We lost our position, and here we have none. So it reminds us, too, of the fickleness of life. Are you seeing a little bit of life lessons or life virtues or life's, what's the word? The stages of life. And here we have fortitude or strength, another of the cardinal virtues. And here we have The Hanged Man. I believe this is another card that was recreated. A number of these cards were. I'm not sure exactly all of them that were. Or if they originally existed in this particular deck, but they existed in other decks of the time. So when Scarabeo decided to create this deck, they just decided to create the deck with all the cards that we know today so that we could use it. Certainly, the bags of money are a reference to, being a traitor, like Judas was to Christ. I wouldn't be a bit surprised if the original intention was a lesson, of reminding us of what Judas did to Jesus Christ. He hung himself out of his deep remorse for what he'd done. And then in later years, the punishment for treason, or being a traitor, was to be hung. Right? Another life lesson. What happens after you die, right? You die. So however you handle your mortal affairs during your lifetime, at some point you meet the Maker, right? At some point you reach the end. Now also, bear in mind, I know that the Black Plague began probably in the 1250, 1249, something like that, or 1349, I think it was 1249. So death was a normal phase of life, I mean, more people, people dropped like flies, during that period of time. They didn't have antibiotics. They didn't have vaccines. They were just living by the luck of the draw, and death was prevalent. And, the card representing death, I don't think they needed to be reminded of it, but it sort of is a sober reminder. Now here we have temperance, right? Modifying one's behavior, especially if you're doing something which could lead to punishment. And what happens, after you die, you're going to be judged, right? Not that this is a judgment card, but it's a warning before all that happens. Maybe, adjust your lifestyle, change, fix. Here, she's mixing one vessel into another, different colored vessels. So the idea is that something is being poured into something else, either diluting it or just creating a new combination, a new liquid. But an adjustment. Now this card is obviously a recreation. It doesn't seem to fit as well, doesn't convincingly seem to belong to the deck. So maybe this particular family did not have a devil card. But devil cards did exist in cards of the time, so here it is. Are you a slave to your vices? There's the three, theological virtues and the four cardinal virtues represented in this deck, right? So are there vices, right? Control your vices. Check your vices at the door, because what happens? Vanity comes before the fall. Now, in a Christian era, like a medieval Christian era, I would think that the reference probably was probably like the Tower of Babel, a lesson of vanity. What happens when you get too uppity? You're cut down from the heavens, from the universe, from God. And then we have the celestial cards, right? We have the star. Maybe it was referencing the Star of Bethlehem, although we don't see the Magi. We just see a woman. But clearly the subject is the heavens, is the stars. We have a similar scene with the moon. the higher authority, the higher realm. We see the sun. And we are ultimately judged. And upon our judgment, if we're fortunate enough, we enter nirvana. This is probably, a city in Milan or something like that. This was the end game, right? Now, it is likely that in some cases, in some regions, the judgment card was the last card. It came after the world card. And I believe that the sequence of some of the other cards were different in different areas, depending on what they considered to be the most important things to be trumped. In addition to those cards, this particular deck also included faith, hope, and charity. So you see, in addition to some of the life lessons that I've described, or the stations in life, the cards were communicating theological virtues and cardinal virtues, right? And reminding us of how temporary our lives are and what happens, when we don't toe the line. You know what I'm saying? So the cards themselves represent reminders of living a good life, of moving forward in preparation for, what happens at the end, with what awaits for us. So the communication, or the images of the cards, what they're communicating, what they're reminding of us, are ways to live a good life. So the things that they communicate are not, of the devil. They're born out of Christianity. They're born out of, at that time, was the religion, in that particular part of the world. So maybe this won't be a good enough argument to give to loved ones or friends or family members or people who judge you harshly. Maybe you could never change their minds. But hopefully this has been helpful to you in understanding that if you're attracted to these cards and you yourself use these cards because you are enchanted by them, I'll use that word, or seduced by them, it's not necessarily because you're an evil, wicked person and you want to do the devil's work. It's because they're beautiful, right? They're beautiful, and they deliver positive messages or warnings. And everything about them is about that. So hopefully this video just eases your own mind that you're not a wicked or evil person because you choose to use the cards as prompts to remember virtuous and noble ways to live, right? Now, I've only showed you the triumph cards, or the trump cards. I didn't get involved with the pip cards or the numbered cards. But if you want to get a little bit of information about those, I have a playlist on numerology, which I suggest you go check out. It's very, very good, and I'm rather proud of it. So I hope, in answer to the question, are tarot cards evil? And if you have self-doubt about going that way because people have put it in your head that they're evil or wicked, I hope this little story that I've shown you through the cards helps calm your own mind that you're not wicked and you're not evil and you're not doing the devil's work if you participate with these cards. Maybe there's nothing you can say to someone who believes that, because maybe their mind is set and there is no way to break that boundary with them, or that barrier. But I hope it's been helpful to you. Until next time, friends, thank you for watching my videos. I hope that you subscribe. I hope you give it a thumbs up. And I hope you visit any link that I put down below. Until next time, friends, stay well and peace.